Hello and welcome to Projector, and as you can see, I'm in a hotel room, but that's not going to stop me from reviewing the new George Clooney, Julia Roberts rom-com Ticket to Paradise. David and Georgia Cotton, played by George Clooney and Julia Roberts respectively, have been divorced for 20 years, only begrudgingly sharing company for the biggest moments of their daughter Lily, played by Caitlin Dever. When Lily takes a trip to Bali after graduating, she falls for G'day, played by Maxime Bouttier, and agrees to marry him. After learning of the news, David and Georgia fly to Bali to try and sabotage the wedding and stop Lily from making the same mistake that they did. So first things first, yes, I am filming this in a hotel room. That's because with London Film Festival the week before, and the fact that I'm at a friend's wedding this week, I haven't really had that much time to film videos, but unfortunately YouTube doesn't sleep and I really should release something. So I'm just going to review this from my hotel room and I'm just going to edit it on my phone. So apologies in advance for this probably being a little bit rougher than usual. But if there's any movie that deserves to be reviewed on a phone, it's probably Ticket to Paradise. Ticket to Paradise is written and directed by Ol Parker, who previously directed Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. He also wrote the screenplays for the two Best Exotic Marigold Hotel movies, so suffice to say, he's carved himself a rather nice niche in movies aimed at a certain demographic that are usually set in picturesque locations. So Ticket to Paradise is very much within his wheelhouse. Of course, the big selling point of Ticket to Paradise is the reteaming of George Clooney and Julia Roberts, who are not just big A-list names, but they're also best friends with each other, having previously appeared in movies like Ocean's 11, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, and most recently, Money Monster. And the casting of them two in the lead is almost certainly meant to evoke the memories of rom-coms past. Of course, Clooney, back in his 90s heyday, starred in One Fine Day, but especially on Julia Roberts' side, because the premise not only evokes a little bit of My Best Friend's Wedding with the fact that Roberts' character is trying to sabotage her daughter's wedding, but of course the whole picturesque location kind of puts you in the mindset of Eat, Pray, Love. It's a movie that definitely tries to evoke the audience's nostalgia for the two leads and tries to use it to its advantage, especially because in some ways, it is meant to be a deliberate throwback. Up until recently, rom-coms have gone through a very rough patch, but they're now starting to see a resurgence thanks to streamers like Netflix, where they can just be thrown on as low-stakes, fluffy viewing for an evening, but they've not really found their way back into movie theatres. So the fact that we have some very big star power here essentially is the reason why this is playing theatrically, but honestly, it is the kind of movie that will probably find its life on streaming nowadays, and the fact that it is in cinemas at all is a bit of an anachronism that is only credited to the fact that its stars are so enormously huge. But rom-coms have their place and they have their charm, especially because, yeah, you kind of know the ending to it going in, and if you don't, you can just watch Ticket to Paradise's trailer, which literally just goes through the movie almost beat for beat, although I will say there's a couple of little bits in the movie that aren't actually in the trailer, like there's a bit more with Julia Roberts' pilot boyfriend who's a bit younger than her and a bit accident prone to say the least, so at least there's some stuff that wasn't in the trailer. Where a rom-com lives or dies largely comes down to the charm of its stars, and of course Clooney and Roberts absolutely have that to spare. They play off each other beautifully because they know each other inside and out. They're essentially this generation's version of Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. My problem might be that it's a little bit too easy a chemistry. They're a little bit too relaxed around one another. They spend a lot of the first chunk of the movie bickering amongst themselves, as you would expect given the setup. They're divorced exes that can barely see the sight of each other, and as such they do get plenty of opportunities to trade barbs and quips with one another, and they are quite funny, and it feels like a lot of them are kind of improvised, certainly given credence by the outtakes at the ending of the movie. Yeah, that's right, there are outtakes at the end of Ticket to Paradise, as if it wasn't an anachronism enough. When was the last time you saw a movie with closing credit outtakes? Nevertheless, my feeling is that it never feels entirely convincing that they're playing characters. They're just playing George Clooney and Julia Roberts, which I guess is a selling point for the target audience, but it does feel like as soon as the director says cut, they're just going to burst out laughing. It all just feels a little bit too chummy and just a little bit too easy, like they're almost going through the motions because they're so completely unchallenged by the material, they can just almost go through this in their sleep. And while Clooney does get a couple of moments where he kind of adds a little bit of shading to the material, particularly a moment where he has a fairly long monologue talking about a land that he bought that he wanted to build a house on, but it kind of caught fire, and that sort of is a metaphor for how their marriage went. It doesn't feel like there is a whole lot going on. But Clooney and Roberts aren't the only real-life friends being cast in the movie, because the film is also a Booksmart reunion at the same time between Caitlin Dever and Billie Lourd, and it definitely feels like Dever was cast in the movie and she basically went, hey, I'm making a movie set in a tropical location, do you want to be my +1 and we'll just write you into the movie? Sure, because that's what friends are for. And Lourd, I wish she was given a little bit more to do in this movie because she's so hilarious in Booksmart, and she literally is just kind of there in this movie. And Caitlin Dever does her best with her role, but the big problem with it is that the audience doesn't really buy the relationship between Lily and G'day because, frankly, they hardly know each other. The parents are just thinking that she's throwing her life away, and to be honest, you kind of end up siding with them a little bit, if not necessarily their methods, because honestly, they've only known each other for little over a month. There are reality television shows that have longer courtships than these two. And yeah, some of it is the fact that she wants to assert her freedom, especially because she doesn't want to follow the path that her parents have set for her of going to law school and everything. But my thought is, what exactly is she going to do after the honeymoon period? After the initial lovesickness passes, what exactly is she going to do in Bali? One thing I will give the movie credit for is that a lesser comedy probably would have made a lot of bad taste, xenophobic culture clash jokes at the expense of the Indonesian culture shown in the film, but Ticket to Paradise surprisingly doesn't do that and actually treats the culture with a degree of respect, even going to the extent of hiring advisors to supervise its depiction in the movie. And you can tell because actually they do present the culture fairly well and fairly faithfully and with a good deal of respect, which is exactly what you want. And this might not have been such a problem if the movie was consistently funnier, especially because you've got Clooney and Roberts, you've essentially got a screwball dynamic. I think that's what the film wants and requires itself to be. Unfortunately, it doesn't have that dynamic, namely because Parker's direction is way too slow. All these comedic setups between the characters all feel kind of a little bit forced, a little bit stagey, like they just haven't quite rehearsed the timing properly. Everything just feels a bit kind of too relaxed. I keep going back to that, but honestly, it does feel that way. It isn't helped by the fact that there are comic interludes that just kind of completely die on their arse. I'm especially thinking of a sequence where Clooney gets attacked by a CGI dolphin out of nowhere and it doesn't really add anything to the movie. And so a lot of the comedic side of the movie just kind of flounders. Yeah, there are some amusing moments like a beer pong game between generations where Roberts and Clooney get to indulge in some very bad dancing, but yeah, pretty low-hanging fruit in that regard. And the movie's pacing really starts to flag in the second half, largely because there is a distinct lack of jokes. The movie starts out fairly strong and puts most of its best gags at the top of the movie, but about halfway through, it really starts to struggle in deciding what exactly it wants to do next, as it just plots its course on the most predictable path, and I found my interest in the movie starting to waver. It isn't helped by the fact the movie is a little bit too long for what it is. It's a little over 100 minutes. it could have done with being about in the region of 90, if I'm being honest. It's very obvious to say that the movie feels like a paid holiday for everyone involved, they just happen to make a movie on the side of, but yeah, that kind of is the vibe of Ticket to Paradise, which is not to say that it necessarily fails on that front. In fact, it works very well as a travel log. There's plenty of gorgeous picturesque locations. In fact, there's a lot of beautiful cinematography for your eyes to look at, even when the story flounders, and also, that's technically not Bali. You see, they actually shot the movie in Australia because they couldn't fly to Bali due to COVID restrictions, but it certainly does a passable job of imitating Bali. But there is definitely an undeniable appeal in just hanging around with two big A-list movie stars on holiday, just kind of going through the motions. And certainly it doesn't show its brazen contempt for the audience in the same way as, say, Adam Sandler's Just Go With It does, but it does feel like the movie is especially flimsy. Even as a basic pretext for this kind of film, the script is absolutely threadbare at times. It also feels like half the time Julia Roberts is just kind of using it as an excuse to dress up in as many costumes as possible. And I know that Roberts and Clooney essentially just have to be glamorous and that's it, but there is a moment that was unintentionally funny to me where Roberts just out of nowhere suddenly changes into a lilac jumpsuit that makes her look exactly like Gadget from Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, which presumably wasn't what they had in mind. Basically what I'm saying is that Ticket to Paradise is affable enough. It's pleasant. In fact, aside from the two F-bombs they've inserted in just to get a PG-13 rating, it's almost entirely harmless. In fact, it's even likeable at times. How much you enjoy the movie largely comes down to how much you're willing to be seduced by the charms of George Clooney and Julia Roberts being George Clooney and Julia Roberts, and the film largely succeeds on their backs. And certainly there is something to be said about a movie that is just low stakes, low engagement, just kind of nice, pleasant escapism. My only problem is, would it have killed them to try just a little bit harder? They didn't have to coast this hard. In fact, it would have been even better had they actually got a funny script to begin with, rather than just allowing their star power to elevate even the absolute flimsiest of vehicles. If you like this review and you want to support my work, and I promise they aren't all filmed in hotels, then you can give me a tip using YouTube's Super Thanks feature right below the video, or you can support me on my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out. And now I've got a wedding to go to.